The Moonstone, Part 25. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. Read by Christine Becher. The Discovery of the Truth. First Narrative. Chapter 2. Mr. Godfrey followed the announcement of his name, as Mr. Godfrey does everything else, exactly at the right time. He was not so close on the servant's heels as to startle us. He was not so far behind as to cause us the double inconvenience of a pause and an open door. It is in the completeness of his daily life that the true Christian appears. This dear man was very complete. "Go to Miss Verinder," said my aunt, addressing the servant, "and tell her Mr. Applewhite is here." We both inquired after his health. We both asked him together whether he felt like himself again after his terrible adventure of the past week. With perfect tact he contrived to answer us at the same moment. Lady Verinder had his reply in words, I had his charming smile. "What," he cried with infinite tenderness, "have I done to deserve all this sympathy?" "My dear aunt, my dear Miss Clack, I have merely been mistaken for somebody else. I have only been blindfolded, I have only been strangled, I have only been thrown flat on my back on a very thin carpet covering a particularly hard floor. Just think how much worse it might have been. I might have been murdered. I might have been robbed. What have I lost? Nothing but nervous force, which the law doesn't recognize as property, so that, strictly speaking, I have lost nothing at all. If I could have had my own way, I would have kept my adventure to myself. I shrink from all this fuss and publicity. But Mr. Looker made his injuries public, and my injuries, as the necessary consequence, have been proclaimed in their turn. I have become the property of the newspapers, until the gentle reader gets sick of the subject. I am very sick indeed of it myself. May the gentle reader soon be like me. And how is dear Rachel? Still enjoying the gaieties of London? So glad to hear it. Miss Clack, I need all your indulgence. I am sadly behindhand with my committee work and my dear ladies. But I really do hope to look in at the mother's small clothes next week. Did you make cheering progress at Monday's committee? Was the board hopeful about future prospects? And are we nicely off for trousers?" The heavenly gentleness of his smile made his apologies irresistible. The richness of his deep voice added its own indescribable charm to the interesting business question which he had just addressed to me. In truth, we were almost too nicely off for trousers. We were quite overwhelmed by them. I was just about to say so when the door opened again, and an element of worldly disturbance entered the room in the person of Miss Verinder. She approached dear Mr. Godfrey at a most unladylike rate of speed, with her hair shockingly untidy and her face, what I should call, unbecomingly flushed. "I am charmed to see you, Godfrey," she said, addressing him, I grieve to add, in the off-hand manner of one young man talking to another. "I wish you had brought Mr. Looker with you. You and he, as long as our present excitement lasts, are the two most interesting men in all London. It's morbid to say this, it's unhealthy, it's all that a well-regulated mind like Miss Clack's most instinctively shudders at. Never mind that. Tell me the whole of the Northumberland Street story directly. I know the newspapers have let some of it out." Even dear Mr. Godfrey partakes of the fallen nature which we all inherit from Adam. It is a very small share of our human legacy, but alas, he has it. I confess it grieved me to see him take Rachel's hand in both of his own hands, and lay it softly on the left side of his waistcoat. It was a direct encouragement to her reckless way of talking, and her insolent reference to me. "Dearest Rachel," he said in the same voice which had thrilled me when he spoke of our prospects and our trousers, "the newspapers have told you everything, and they have told it much better than I can." "Godfrey thinks we all make too much of the matter," my aunt remarked. "He has just been saying that he doesn't care to speak of it." "Why?" She put the question with a sudden flush in her eyes, and a sudden look up into Mr. Godfrey's face. On his side he looked down at her with an indulgence so injudicious and so ill-deserved that I really felt called on to interfere. "Rachel, darling," I remonstrated gently, "true greatness and true courage are ever modest." "You are a very good fellow in your way, Godfrey," she said, not taking the smallest notice, observe, of me, and still speaking to her cousin as if she was one young man addressing another. "But I am quite sure you are not great. I don't believe you possess any extraordinary courage, and I am firmly persuaded, if you ever had any modesty, that your lady worshippers relieved you of that virtue a good many years since. You have some private reason for not talking of your adventure in Northumberland Street, and I mean to know it." "My reason is the simplest imaginable, and the most easily acknowledged," he answered, still bearing with her. "I am tired of the subject." "You are tired of the subject? My dear Godfrey, I am going to make a remark." "What is it?" "You live a great deal too much in the society of women, and you have contracted two very bad habits in consequence. You have learned to talk nonsense seriously, and you have got into a way of telling fibs for the pleasure of telling them. You can't go straight with your lady worshippers. I mean to make you go straight with me. Come and sit down. I am brimful of downright questions, and I expect you to be brimful of downright answers." She actually dragged him across the room to a chair by the window, where the light would fall in his face. I deeply feel being obliged to report such language and to describe such conduct. But hemmed in as I am between Mr. Franklin Blake's check on one side and my own sacred regard for truth on the other, what am I to do? I looked at my aunt. She sat unmoved, apparently in no way disposed to interfere. I had never noticed this kind of torpor in her before. It was perhaps the reaction after the trying time she had had in the country. Not a pleasant symptom to remark, be it what it might, at dear Lady Verinder's age, and with dear Lady Verinder's autumnal exuberance of figure. In the meantime Rachel had settled herself at the window with our amiable and forbearing, our too forbearing Mr. Godfrey. She began the string of questions with which she had threatened him, taking no more notice of her mother or of myself than if we had not been in the room. "Have the police done anything, Godfrey?" "Nothing whatever." "It is certain, I suppose, that the three men who laid the trap for you were the same three men who afterwards laid the trap for Mr. Luca?" "Humanly speaking, my dear Rachel, there can be no doubt of it." "And not a trace of them has been discovered?" "Not a trace." "It is so, is it not, that these three men are the three Indians who came to our house in the country?" "Some people think so." "Do you think so?" "My dear Rachel, they blindfolded me before I could see their faces. I know nothing whatever of the matter. How can I offer an opinion on it?" Even the angelic gentleness of Mr. Godfrey was, you see, beginning to give way at last under the persecution inflicted on him. Whether unbridled curiosity or ungovernable dread dictated Miss Verinder's questions I do not presume to inquire. I only report that, on Mr. Godfrey's attempting to rise, after giving her the answer just described, she actually took him by the two shoulders and pushed him back into his chair. Oh, don't say this was immodest. Don't even hint that the recklessness of guilty terror could alone account for such conduct as I have described. We must not judge others. My Christian friends, indeed, we must not judge others. She went on with her questions unabashed. Earnest biblical students will perhaps be reminded, as I was reminded, of the blinded children of the devil, who went on with their orgies unabashed in the time before the flood. "I want to know something about Mr. Luca, Godfrey." "I am again unfortunate, Rachel. No man knows less of Mr. Luca than I do." "You never saw him before you and he met accidentally at the bank?" "Never." "You have seen him since?" "Yes. We have been examined together, as well as separately, to assist the police." Mr. Luca was robbed of a receipt which he had got from his bankers, was he not? What was the receipt for?" "For a valuable gem which he had placed in the safe keeping of the bank." "That's what the newspapers say. It may be enough for the general reader, but it is not enough for me. The banker's receipt must have mentioned what the gem was." "The banker's receipt, Rachel, as I have heard it described, mentioned nothing of the kind. A valuable gem, belonging to Mr. Luca, deposited by Mr. Luca, sealed with Mr. Luca's seal, and only to be given up on Mr. Luca's personal application. That was the form, and that is all I know about it." She waited a moment after he had said that. She looked at her mother and sighed. She looked back again at Mr. Godfrey and went on. "Some of our private affairs at home," she said, "seem to have got into the newspapers." "I grieve to say it is so." "And some idle people, perfect strangers to us, are trying to trace a connection between what happened at our house in Yorkshire and what has happened since, here in London. The public curiosity in certain quarters is, I fear, taking that turn. The people who say that the three unknown men who ill-used you and Mr. Luca are the three Indians also say that the valuable gem—" There she stopped. She had become gradually, within the last few moments, whiter and whiter in her face. The extraordinary blackness of her hair made this paleness, by contrast, so ghastly to look at, that we all thought she would faint, at the moment when she checked herself in the middle of her question. Dear Mr. Godfrey made a second attempt to leave his chair. My aunt entreated her to say no more. I followed my aunt with a modest medicinal peace offering in the shape of a bottle of salts. We none of us produced the slightest effect on her. "Godfrey, stay where you are. Mamma, there is not the least reason to be alarmed about me. Cluck, you're dying to hear the end of it. I won't faint expressly to oblige you." Those were the exact words she used, taken down in my diary the moment I got home. But oh, don't let us judge, my Christian friends, don't let us judge. She turned once more to Mr. Godfrey. With an obstinacy dreadful to see, she went back again to her place, where she had checked herself, and completed her question in these words: "I spoke to you a minute since about what people were saying in certain quarters. Tell me plainly, Godfrey, do they any of them say that Mr. Luca's valuable gem is the Moonstone?" As the name of the Indian diamond passed her lips, I saw a change come over my admirable friend. His complexion deepened. He lost the genial suavity of manner which is one of his greatest charms. A noble indignation inspired his reply. "They do say it," he answered. "There are people who don't hesitate to accuse Mr. Luca of telling a falsehood to serve some private interests of his own. He has over and over again solemnly declared that until this scandal assailed him he had never even heard of the Moonstone. And these vile people reply, without a shadow of proof to justify them, he has his reasons for concealment. We decline to believe him on his oath. Shameful, shameful." Rachel looked at him very strangely, I can't well describe how, while he was speaking. When he had done, she said, "Considering that Mr. Luca is only a chance acquaintance of yours, you take up his cause, Godfrey, rather warmly." My gifted friend made her one of the most truly evangelical answers I ever heard in my life. "I hope, Rachel, I take up the cause of all oppressed people rather warmly," he said. The tone in which those words were spoken might have melted a stone, but, oh dear, what is the hardness of stone? Nothing compared to the hardness of the unregenerate human heart. She sneered. I blush to record it, she sneered at him to his face. "Keep your noble sentiments for your ladies' committees, Godfrey. I am certain that the scandal which has assailed Mr. Luca has not spared you." Even my aunt's torpor was roused by those words. "My dear Rachel," she remonstrated, "you have really no right to say that." "I mean no harm, mamma, I mean good. Have a moment's patience with me, and you will see." She looked back at Mr. Godfrey with what appeared to be a sudden pity for him. She went the length, the very unladylike length, of taking him by the hand. "I am certain," she said, "that I have found out the true reason of your unwillingness to speak of this matter before my mother and before me. An unlucky accident has associated you in people's minds with Mr. Luca. You have told me what scandal says of him. What does scandal say of you?" Even at the 11th hour, dear Mr. Godfrey, always ready to return good for evil, tried to spare her. "Don't ask me," he said. "It's better forgotten, Rachel. It is indeed." "I will hear it," she cried out fiercely at the top of her voice. "Tell her, Godfrey," entreated my aunt. "Nothing can do her such harm as your silence is doing now." Mr. Godfrey's fine eyes filled with tears. He cast one last appealing look at her, and then he spoke the fatal words. "If you will have it, Rachel, scandal says that the Moonstone is in pledge to Mr. Luca, and that I am the man who has pawned it." She started to her feet with a scream. She looked backwards and forwards from Mr. Godfrey to my aunt, and from my aunt to Mr. Godfrey, in such a frantic manner that I really thought she had gone mad. "Don't speak to me! Don't touch me!" she exclaimed, shrinking back from all of us, I declare like some hunted animal, into a corner of the room. "This is my fault. I must set it right. I have sacrificed myself. I had a right to do that if I liked, but to let an innocent man be ruined, to keep a secret which destroys his character for life. Oh, good God! It's too horrible. I can't bear it." My aunt half rose from her chair, then suddenly sat down again. She called to me faintly, and pointed to a little phial in her workbox. "Quick!" she whispered. "6 drops in water. Don't let Rachel see." Under other circumstances I should have thought this strange. There was no time now to think, there was only time to give the medicine. Dear Mr. Godfrey unconsciously assisted me in concealing what I was about from Rachel, by speaking composing words to her at the other end of the room. "Indeed, indeed, you exaggerate," I heard him say. "My reputation stands too high to be destroyed by a miserable passing scandal like this. It will be all forgotten in another week. Let us never speak of it again." She was perfectly inaccessible, even to such generosity as this. She went on from bad to worse. "I must and will stop it," she said. "Mamma, hear what I say. Miss Clack, hear what I say. I know the hand that took the Moonstone. I know." She laid a strong emphasis on the words. She stamped her foot in the rage that possessed her. "I know that Godfrey Ablewhite is innocent. Take me to the magistrate, Godfrey. Take me to the magistrate, and I will swear it." My aunt caught me by the hand and whispered, "Stand between us for a minute or two. Don't let Rachel see me." I noticed a blush tinge in her face which alarmed me. She thought I was startled. "The drops will put me right in a minute or two," she said, and so closed her eyes and waited a little. While this was going on, I heard dear Mr. Godfrey still gently remonstrating. "You must not appear publicly in such a thing as this," he said. "Your reputation, dearest Rachel, is something too pure and too sacred to be trifled with." "My reputation!" she burst out laughing. "Why, I am accused, Godfrey, as well as you. The best detective officer in England declares that I have stolen my own diamond. Ask him what he thinks, and he will tell you that I have pledged the Moonstone to pay my private debts." She stopped, ran across the room, and fell on her knees at her mother's feet. "Oh, mamma, mamma, mamma! I must be mad, mustn't I, not to own the truth now?" She was too vehement to notice her mother's condition. She was on her feet again and back with Mr. Godfrey in an instant. "I won't let you. I won't let any innocent man be accused and disgraced through my fault. If you won't take me before the magistrate, draw out a declaration of your innocence on paper, and I will sign it. Do as I tell you, Godfrey, or I will write it to the newspapers. I'll go out. and cry it in the streets. We will not say this was the language of remorse, we will say it was the language of hysterics. Indulgent Mr. Godfrey pacified her by taking a sheet of paper and drawing out the declaration. She signed it in a feverish hurry. "Show it everywhere, don't think of me," she said, as she gave it to him. "I am afraid, Godfrey, I have not done you justice hitherto in my thoughts. You are more unselfish, you are a better man than I believed you to be. Come here when you can, and I will try to repair the wrong I have done you." She gave him her hand. Alas for our fallen nature! Alas for Mr. Godfrey! He not only forgot himself so far as to kiss her hand, he adopted a gentleness of tone in answering her, which, in such a case, was little better than a compromise with sin. "I will come, dearest," he said, "on condition that we don't speak of this hateful subject again." Never had I seen and heard our Christian hero to less advantage than on this occasion. Before another word could be said by anybody, a thundering knock at the street door startled us all. I looked through the window and saw the world, the flesh, and the devil waiting before the house, as typified in a carriage and horses, a powdered footman, and three of the most audaciously dressed women I ever beheld in my life. Rachel started and composed herself. She crossed the room to her mother. "They have come to take me to the flower show," she said. "One word, mamma, before I go. I have not distressed you, have I?" Is the bluntness of moral feeling, which could ask such a question as that after what had just happened, to be pitied or condemned? I like to lean towards mercy. Let us pity it. The drops had produced their effect. My poor aunt's complexion was like itself again. "No, no, my dear," she said, "go with our friends and enjoy yourself." Her daughter stopped and kissed her. I had left the window and was near the door when Rachel approached it to go out. Another change had come over her. She was in tears. I looked with interest at the momentary softening of that obdurate heart. I felt inclined to say a few earnest words. Alas, my well-meant sympathy only gave offence. "What do you mean by pitying me?" she asked in a bitter whisper, as she passed to the door. "Don't you see how happy I am? I am going to the flower show, Clark, and I've got the prettiest bonnet in London." She completed the hollow mockery of that address by blowing me a kiss, and so left the room. I wish I could describe in words the compassion I felt for this miserable and misguided girl, but I am almost as poorly provided with words as with money. Permit me to say, my heart bled for her. Returning to my aunt's chair, I observed dear Mr. Godfrey searching for something softly here and there in different parts of the room. Before I could offer to assist him he had found what he wanted. He came back to my aunt and me with his declaration of innocence in one hand and with a box of matches in the other. "Dear aunt, a little conspiracy," he said. "Dear Miss Clack, a pious fraud which even your high moral rectitude will excuse. Will you leave Rachel to suppose that I accept the generous self-sacrifice which has signed this paper? And will you kindly bear witness that I destroy it in your presence before I leave the house?" He kindled a match and lighting the paper let it to burn in a plate on the table. "Any trifling inconvenience that I must suffer is a nothing," he remarked, "compared with the importance of preserving that pure name from the contaminating contact of the world. There, we have reduced it to a little harmless heap of ashes, and our dear impulsive Rachel will never know what we have done. How do you feel? My precious friends, how do you feel? For my poor part, I am as light-hearted as a boy." He beamed on us with his beautiful smile. He held out a hand to my aunt and a hand to me. I was too deeply affected by his noble conduct to speak. I closed my eyes. I put his hand in a kind of spiritual self-forgetfulness to my lips. He murmured a soft remonstrance. Oh, the ecstasy, the pure, unearthly ecstasy of that moment! I sat, I hardly know on what, quite lost in my own exalted feelings. When I opened my eyes again, It was like descending from heaven to earth. There was nobody but my aunt in the room. He had gone. I should like to stop here. I should like to close my narrative with a record of Mr. Godfrey's noble conduct. Unhappily there is more, much more, which the unrelenting pecuniary pressure of Mr. Blake's cheque obliges me to tell. The painful disclosures which were to reveal themselves in my presence during that Tuesday's visit to Montagu Square were not at an end yet. Finding myself alone with Lady Verinder, I turned naturally to the subject of her health, touching delicately on the strange anxiety which she had shown to conceal her indisposition, and the remedy applied to it, from the observation of her daughter. My aunt's reply greatly surprised me. "Drusilla," she said. If I have not already mentioned that my Christian name is Drusilla, permit me to mention it now. You are touching quite innocently, I know, on a very distressing subject. I rose immediately. Delicacy left me but one alternative, the alternative, after first making my apologies, of taking my leave. Lady Verinder stopped me and insisted on my sitting down again. "You have surprised a secret," she said, "which I had confided to my sister Mrs. Applewhite, and to my lawyer Mr. Bruff, and to no one else. I can trust in their discretion, and I am sure, when I tell you the circumstances, I can trust in yours. Have you any pressing engagement, Drusilla, or is your time your own this afternoon?" It is needless to say that my time was entirely at my aunt's disposal. "Keep me company, then," she said, "for another hour. I have something to tell you which I believe you will be sorry to hear. And I shall have a service to ask of you afterwards, if you don't object to assist me." It is again needless to say that, so far from objecting, I was all eagerness to assist her. "You can wait here," she went on, "till Mr. Bruff comes at 5, and you can be one of the witnesses, Drusilla, when I sign my will." Her will! I thought of the drops which I had seen in her workbox. I thought of the bluish tinge which I had noticed in her complexion. A light which was not of this world, a light shining prophetically from an unmade grave, dawned on my mind. My aunt's secret was a secret no longer. End of Part 25. The Moonstone, Part 26. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Moonstone, by Wilkie Collins. Read by Christine Becher. The Discovery of the Truth. First Narrative. Chapter 3. Consideration for poor Lady Verinder forbade me even to hint that I had guessed the melancholy truth before she opened her lips. I waited her pleasure in silence, and, having privately arranged to say a few sustaining words at the first convenient opportunity, felt prepared for any duty that could claim me, no matter how painful it might be. "I have been seriously ill, Drusilla, for some time past," my aunt began, "and, strange to say, without knowing it myself. I thought of the thousands and thousands of perishing human creatures who were all at that moment spiritually ill, without knowing it themselves, and I greatly feared that my poor aunt might be one of the number." "Yes, dear," I said sadly, "yes." "I brought Rachel to London, as you know, for a medical advice," she went on. "I thought it right to consult 2 doctors." 2 doctors! And, oh me, in Rachel's state, not one clergyman! "Yes, dear," I said once more, "yes." "One of the 2 medical men," proceeded my aunt, "was a stranger to me. The other had been an old friend of my husband's, and had always felt a sincere interest in me for my husband's sake. After prescribing for Rachel, he said he wished to speak to me privately in another room. I expected, of course, to receive some special directions for the management of my daughter's health. To my surprise, he took me gravely by the hand and said, "I have been looking at you, Lady Verinder, with a professional as well as a personal interest. You are, I am afraid, far more urgently in need of medical advice than your daughter." He put some questions to me which I was at first inclined to treat lightly enough, until I observed that my answers distressed him. It ended in his making an appointment to come and see me, accompanied by a medical friend, on the next day, at an hour when Rachel would not be at home. The result of that visit, most kindly and gently conveyed to me, satisfied both the physicians that there had been precious time lost which could never be regained, and that my case had now passed beyond the reach of their art. For more than 2 years I have been suffering under an insidious form of heart disease, which, without any symptoms to alarm me, has by little and little fatally broken me down. I may live for some months, or I may die before another day has passed over my head. The doctors cannot, and dare not, speak more positively than this. It would be vain to say, my dear, that I have not had some miserable moments since my real situation has been made known to me. But I am more resigned than I was, and I am doing my best to set my worldly affairs in order. My one great anxiety is that Rachel should be kept in ignorance of the truth. If she knew it, she would at once attribute my broken health to anxiety about the diamond, and would reproach herself bitterly, poor child, for what is in no sense her fault. Both the doctors agree that the mischief began 2, if not 3 years since. I am sure you will keep my secret, Drusilla, for I am sure I see sincere sorrow and sympathy for me in your face." Sorrow and sympathy! Oh, what pagan emotions to expect from a Christian Englishwoman anchored firmly on her faith! Little did my poor aunt imagine what a gush of devout thankfulness thrilled through me as she approached the close of her melancholy story. Here was a career of usefulness opened before me. Here was a beloved relative and perishing fellow creature on the eve of the great change, utterly unprepared, and led, providentially led, to reveal her situation to me. How can I describe the joy with which I now remembered that the precious clerical friends on whom I could rely were to be counted, not by ones or twos, but by tens and twenties? I took my aunt in my arms. My overflowing tenderness was not to be satisfied now without anything less than an embrace. "Oh," I said to her fervently, "the indescribable interest with which you inspire me! Oh, the good I mean to do you, dear, before we part!" After another word or two of earnest prefatory warning, I gave her her choice of 3 precious friends, all plying the work of mercy from morning to night in her own neighborhood, all equally inexhaustible in exhortation, all affectionately ready to exercise their gifts at a word from me. Alas! the result was far from encouraging. Poor Lady Verinder looked puzzled and frightened, and met everything I could say to her with the purely worldly objection that she was not strong enough to face strangers. I yielded, for the moment only, of course. My large experience as reader and visitor under not less, first and last, than 14 beloved clerical friends, informed me that this was another case for preparation by books. I possessed a little library of works, all suitable to the present emergency, all calculated to arouse, convince, prepare, enlighten, and fortify my aunt. "You will read, dear, won't you?" I said in my most winning way. "You will read if I bring you my own precious books, turned down at all the right places, aunt? And marked in pencil where you are to stop and ask yourself, 'Does it apply to me?'" Even that simple appeal, so absolutely heathening in the influence of the world, appeared to startle my aunt. She said, "I will do what I can, Drusilla, to please you," with a look of surprise, which was at once instructive and terrible to see. Not a moment was to be lost. The clock on the mantelpiece informed me that I had just time to hurry home, to provide myself with a first series of selected readings, say a dozen only, and to return in time to meet the lawyer and witness Lady Verinder's will. Promising faithfully to be back by 5 o'clock, I left the house on my errand of mercy. When no interests but my own are involved, I am humbly content to get from place to place by the omnibus. Permit me to give an idea of my devotion to my aunt's interests by recording that, on this occasion, I committed the prodigality of taking a cab. I drove home, selected and marked my first series of readings, and drove back to Montagu Square, with a dozen works in a carpet-bag, the like of which, I firmly believe, are not to be found in the literature of any other country of Europe. I paid the cabman exactly his fare. He received it with an oath, upon which I instantly gave him a tract. If I had presented a pistol at his head, this abandoned wretch could hardly have exhibited greater consternation. He jumped up on his box, and, with profane exclamations of dismay, drove off furiously. Quite useless, I am happy to say. I sowed the good seed, in spite of him, by throwing a second tract in at the window of the cab. The servant who answered the door, not the person with the cap ribbons to my great relief, but the footman, informed me that the doctor had called and was still shut up with Lady Verinder. Mr. Brough, the lawyer, had arrived a minute since, and was waiting in the library. I was shown into the library to wait too. Mr. Brough looked surprised to see me. He is the family solicitor, and we had met more than once on previous occasions under Lady Verinder's roof. A man, I grieve to say, grown old and grizzled in the service of the world. A man who, in his hours of business, was the chosen prophet of love and mammon, and who, in his hours of leisure, was equally capable of reading a novel and of tearing up a tract. "Have you come to stay here, Miss Clark?" he asked, with a look at my carpet-bag. To reveal the contents of my precious bag to such a person as this would have been simply to invite an outburst of profanity. I lowered myself to his own level, and mentioned my business in the house. "My aunt has informed me that she is about to sign her will," I answered. "She has been so good as to ask me to be one of the witnesses." "Aye, aye. Well, Miss Clark, you will do. You are over 21, and you have not the slightest pecuniary interest in Lady Verinder's will." Not the slightest pecuniary interest in Lady Verinder's will. Oh, how thankful I felt when I heard that! If my aunt, possessed of thousands, had remembered poor me, to whom £5 is an object; if my name had appeared in the will, with a little comforting legacy attached to it, my enemies might have doubted. The motive which had loaded me with the choicest treasures of my library, and had drawn upon my failing resources for the prodigal expenses of a cab. Not the cruellest scoffer of them all could doubt now. Much better as it was. Oh, surely, surely, much better as it was. I was aroused from these consoling reflections by the voice of Mr. Brough. My meditative silence appeared to weigh upon the spirits of this worldling, and to force him, as it were, into talking to me against his own will. "Well, Miss Clark, what's the last news in the charitable circles? How is your friend Mr. Godfrey Applewhite, after the mauling he got from the rags in Northumberland Street? Egad, they're telling a pretty story about that charitable gentleman at my club." I had passed over the manner in which this person had remarked that I was more than 21, and that I had no pecuniary interest in my aunt's will, but the tone in which he alluded to dear Mr. Godfrey was too much for my forbearance. Feeling bound, after what had passed in my presence that afternoon, to assert the innocence of my admirable friend whenever I found it called in question, I own to having also felt bound to include in the accomplishment of this righteous purpose a stinging castigation in the case of Mr. Brough. "I live very much out of the world," I said, "and I don't possess the advantage, sir, of belonging to a club, but I happen to know the story to which you allude, and I also know that a viler falsehood than that story never was told." "Yes, yes, Miss Clark, you believe in your friend. Natural enough. Mr. Godfrey Applewhite won't find the world in general quite so easy to convince as a committee of charitable ladies. Appearances are dead against him. He was in the house when the diamond was lost, and he was the first person in the house to go to London afterwards. Those are ugly circumstances, madam, viewed from the light of later events. I ought, I know, to have set him right before he went any farther. I ought to have told him that he was speaking in ignorance of a testimony to Mr. Godfrey's innocence, offered by the only person who was undeniably competent to speak from a positive knowledge of the subject. Alas, the temptation to lead the lawyer artfully on to his own discomfiture was too much for me. I asked what he meant by later events, with an appearance of the utmost innocence. "By later events, Miss Clark, I mean events in which the Indians are concerned," proceeded Mr. Bruff, getting more and more superior to poor me, the longer he went on. "What do the Indians do the moment they are let out of the prison at Friesinghall? They go straight to London and fix on Mr. Looker. What follows? Mr. Looker feels alarmed for the safety of a valuable of great price, which he has got in the house. He lodges it privately, under a general description, in his banker's strong room. Wonderfully clever of him, but the Indians are just as clever on their side. They have their suspicions that the valuable of great price is being shifted from one place to another, and they hit on a singularly bold and complete way of clearing those suspicions up. Whom do they seize and search? Not Mr. Looker only, which would be intelligible enough, but Mr. Godfrey Applewhite as well. Why? Mr. Applewhite's explanation is that they acted on blind suspicion after seeing him accidentally speaking to Mr. Looker. Absurd! Half a dozen other people spoke to Mr. Looker that morning. Why were they not followed home too, and decoyed into the trap? No, no, the plain inference is that Mr. Applewhite had his private interest in the valuable, as well as Mr. Looker, and that the Indians were so uncertain as to which of the two had the disposal of it, that there was no alternative but to search them both. Public opinion says that, Miss Clark, and public opinion on this occasion is not easily refuted." He said those last words looking so wonderfully wise in his own worldly conceit that I really, to my shame be it spoken, could not resist leading him a little further still, before I overwhelmed him with the truth. "I don't presume to argue with a clever lawyer like you," I said, "but it is quite fair, sir, to Mr. Applewhite to pass over the opinion of the famous London police officer who investigated this case. Not the shadow of a suspicion rested upon anybody but Miss Verinder in the mind of Sergeant Cuff." "Do you mean to tell me, Miss Clark, that you agree with the sergeant?" "I judge nobody, sir, and I offer no opinion." "And I commit both those enormities, madam. I judge the sergeant to have been utterly wrong, and I offer the opinion that, if he had known Rachel's character as I know it, he would have suspected everybody in the house but her. I admit that she has her faults. She is secret and self-willed, odd and wild, and unlike other girls of her age, but true as steel and high-minded and generous to a fault. If the plainest evidence in the world pointed one way, and if nothing but Rachel's word of honor pointed to the other, I would take her word before the evidence, lawyer as I am. Strong language, Miss Clark, but I mean it." "Would you object to illustrate your meaning, Mr. Bruff, so that I may be sure I understand it? Suppose you found Miss Verinder quite unaccountably interested in what has happened to Mr. Applewhite and Mr. Looker. Suppose she asked the strangest questions about this dreadful scandal, and displayed the most ungovernable agitation when she found out the turn it was taking." "Suppose anything you please, Miss Clark. It wouldn't shake my belief in Rachel Verinder by a hair's breadth." "She is so absolutely to be relied on as that?" "So absolutely to be relied on as that." "Then permit me to inform you, Mr. Bruff, that Mr. Godfrey Applewhite was in this house not 2 hours since, and that his entire innocence of all concern in the disappearance of the Moonstone was proclaimed by Miss Verinder herself, in the strongest language I ever heard used by a young lady in my life. I enjoyed the triumph, the unholy triumph, I fear I must admit, of seeing Mr. Bruff utterly confounded and overthrown by a few plain words from me. He started to his feet and stared at me in silence. I kept my seat, and disturbed and related the whole scene as it had occurred. "And what do you say about Mr. Applewhite now?" I asked, with the utmost possible gentleness as soon as I had done. "If Rachel has testified to his innocence, Miss Cluck, I don't scruple to say that I believe in his innocence as firmly as you do. I have been misled by appearances, like the rest of the world, and I will make the best atonement I can by publicly contradicting the scandal which has assailed your friend wherever I meet with it. In the meantime allow me to congratulate you on the masterly manner in which you have opened the full fire of your batteries on me at the moment when I least expected it. You would have done great things in my profession, madam, if you had happened to be a man." With those words he turned away from me and began walking irritably up and down the room. I could see plainly that the new light I had thrown on the subject had greatly surprised and disturbed him. Certain expressions dropped from his lips as he became more and more absorbed in his own thoughts, which suggested to my mind the abominable view that he had hitherto taken of the mystery of the lost Moonstone. He had not scrupled to suspect dear Mr. Godfrey of the infamy of stealing the diamond, and to attribute Rachel's conduct to a generous resolution to conceal the crime. On Miss Verinder's own authority, a perfectly unaccessible authority, as you are aware, in the estimation of Mr. Bruff, that explanation of the circumstances was now shown to be utterly wrong. The perplexity into which I had plunged this high legal authority was so overwhelming that he was quite unable to conceal it from notice. "What a case!" I heard him say to himself, stopping at the window in his walk and drumming on the glass with his fingers. "It not only defies explanation, it's even beyond conjecture." There was nothing in these words which made any reply at all needful on my part, and yet I answered them. "It seems hardly credible that I should not have been able to let Mr. Bruff alone even now. It seems almost beyond mere mortal perversity that I should have discovered, in what he had just said, a new opportunity of making myself personally disagreeable to him. But ah, my friends, nothing is beyond mortal perversity, and anything is credible when our fallen natures get the better of us." "Pardon me for intruding on your reflections," I said to the unsuspecting Mr. Bruff, "but surely there is a conjecture to make which has not occurred to us yet." "Maybe, Miss Cluck. I own I don't know what it is." "Before I was so fortunate, sir, as to convince you of Mr. Ablewhite's innocence, you mentioned in a case of the reasons for suspecting him, that he was in the house at the time when the diamond was lost. Permit me to remind you that Mr. Franklin Blake was also in the house at the time when the diamond was lost." The old worldling left the window, took a chair exactly opposite to mine, and looked at me steadily, with a hard and vicious smile. "You are not so good a lawyer, Miss Cluck," he remarked, in a meditative manner, "as I supposed. You don't know how to let well alone." "I am afraid I failed to follow you, Mr. Bruff," I said modestly. "It won't do, Miss Cluck. It really won't do a second time. Franklin Blake is a prime favourite of mine, as you are well aware. But that doesn't matter. I'll adopt your view, on this occasion, before you have time to turn round on me. You're quite right, madam. I have suspected Mr. Ablewhite on grounds which abstractly justify suspecting Mr. Blake too. Very good, let's suspect them together. It's quite in his character, we will say, to be capable of stealing the Moonstone. The only question is whether it was his interest to do so." "Mr. Franklin Blake's debts," I remarked, "are matters of family notoriety." "And Mr. Godfrey Ablewhite's debts have not arrived at that stage of development yet. Quite true. But there happen to be two difficulties in the way of your theory, Miss Cluck. I manage Franklin Blake's affairs, and I beg to inform you that the vast majority of his creditors, knowing his father to be a rich man, are quite content to charge interest on their debts, and to wait for their money. There is the first difficulty, which is tough enough. You will find the second tougher still. I have it on the authority of Lady Verinder herself that her daughter was ready to marry Franklin Blake. Therefore that infernal Indian diamond disappeared from the house. She had drawn him on and put him off again, with the coquetry of a young girl. But she had confessed to her mother that she loved Cousin Franklin, and her mother had trusted Cousin Franklin with the secret. So there he was, Miss Clack, with his creditors content to wait, and with a certain prospect before him of marrying an heiress. By all means consider him a scoundrel, but tell me, if you please, why he should steal the Moonstone?" "The human heart is unsearchable," I said gently. "Who is to fathom it?" "In other words, madam, though he hadn't the shadow of a reason for taking the diamond, he might have taken it nevertheless through natural depravity. Very well. Say he did. Why the devil—" "I beg your pardon, Mr. Bruff. If I hear the devil referred to in that manner, I must leave the room." "I beg your pardon, Miss Clack. I'll be more careful in my choice of language for the future. All I meant to ask was this: why, even supposing he did take the diamond, should Franklin Blake make himself the most prominent person in the house in trying to recover it? You may tell me he cunningly did that to divert suspicion from himself. I answer that he had no need to divert suspicion, because nobody suspected him. He first steals the Moonstone, without the slightest reason, through natural depravity, and he then acts a part in relation to the loss of the jewel which there is not the slightest necessity to act, and which leads to his mortally offending the young lady who would otherwise have married him. That is the monstrous proposition which you are driven to assert, if you attempt to associate the disappearance of the Moonstone with Franklin Blake. No, no, Miss Clack. After what has passed here today, between us two the deadlock, in this case, is complete. Rachel's own innocence is, as her mother knows, and as I know, beyond a doubt. Mr. Abblewhite's innocence is equally certain, or Rachel would have never testified to it. And Franklin Blake's innocence, as you have just seen, unanswerably asserts itself. On the one hand, we are morally certain of all these things, and on the other hand, we are equally sure that somebody has brought the Moonstone to London, and that Mr. Luca or his banker is in private possession of it at this moment. What is the use of my experience, what is the use of any person's experience in such a case as that? It baffles me, it baffles you, it baffles everybody." No, not everybody. It had not baffled Sergeant Cuff. I was about to mention this with all possible mildness, and with every necessary protest against being supposed to cast a slur upon Rachel, when the servant came in to say that the doctor had gone, and that my aunt was waiting to receive us. This stopped the discussion. Mr. Bruff collected his papers, looking a little exhausted by the demands which our conversation had made on him. I took up my bag full of precious publications, feeling as if I could have gone on talking for hours. We proceeded in silence to Lady Verinder's room. Permit me to add here, before my narrative advances to other events, that I have not described what passed between the lawyer and me without having a definite object in view. I am ordered to include in my contribution to the shocking story of the Moonstone a plain disclosure, not only of the turn which suspicion took, but even of the names of the persons on whom suspicion rested, at the time when the Indian diamond was believed to be in London. A report of my conversation in the library with Mr. Bruff appeared to me to be exactly what was wanted to answer this purpose, while, at the same time, it possessed the great moral advantage of rendering a sacrifice of sinful self-esteem essentially necessary on my part. I have been obliged to acknowledge that my fallen nature got the better of me. In making that humiliating confession, I get the better of my fallen nature. The moral balance is restored. The spiritual atmosphere feels clear once more. Dear friends, we may go on again. End of part 26. The Moonstone, Part 27. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. Read by Christine. The Discovery of the Truth. First Narrative. Chapter 4. The signing of the will was a much shorter matter than I had anticipated. It was hurried over to my thinking in indecent haste. Samuel, the footman, was sent for to act as a second witness, and the pen was put at once into my aunt's hand. I felt strongly urged to say a few appropriate words on this solemn occasion, but Mr. Bruff's manner convinced me that it was wisest to check the impulse while he was in the room. In less than 2 minutes it was all over, and Samuel, unbenefited by what I might have said, had gone downstairs again. Mr. Bruff folded up the will and then looked my way, apparently wondering whether I did or did not mean to leave him alone with my aunt. I had my mission of mercy to fulfil, and my bag of precious publications ready on my lap. He might as well have expected to move St. Paul's Cathedral by looking at it as to move me. There was one merit about him, due no doubt to his worldly training, which I have no wish to deny. He was quick at setting things. I appeared to produce almost the same impression on him which I had produced on the cabman. He, too, uttered a profane expression, and withdrew in a violent hurry, and left me mistress of the field. As soon as we were alone, my aunt reclined on the sofa, and then alluded, with some appearance of confusion, to the subject of her will. "I hope you won't think yourself neglected, Drusilla," she said. "I mean to give you your little legacy, my dear, with my own hand." Here was a golden opportunity. I seized it on the spot. In other words, I instantly opened my bag and took out the top publication. It proved to be an early edition, only the 25th, of the famous anonymous work, believed to be by precious Miss Bellows, entitled The Serpent at Home. The design of the book, with which the worldly reader may not be acquainted, is to show how the evil one lies in wait for us in all the most apparently innocent actions of our daily lives. The chapters best adapted to female perusal are Satin in the Hairbrush, Satin behind the Looking-glass, Satin under the Tea-table, Satin out of the window, and many others. Give your attention, my dear aunt, to this precious book, and you will give me all I ask. With those words I handed it to her open, at a marked passage, one continuous burst of burning eloquence. Subject: Satin among the sofa cushions. Poor Lady Verinder, reclining thoughtlessly on her own sofa cushions, glanced at the book and handed it back to me looking more confused than ever. "I am afraid, Drusilla," she said, "I must wait till I am a little better before I can read that. The doctor—" The moment she mentioned the doctor's name I knew what was coming. Over and over again in my past experience among my perishing fellow creatures, the members of the notoriously infidel profession of medicine had stepped between me and my mission of mercy, on the miserable pretence that the patient wanted quiet, and that the disturbing influence of all others, which they most dreaded, was the influence of Miss Cluck and her books. Precisely the same blinded materialism, working treacherously behind my back, now sought to rob me of the only right of property that my poverty could claim, my right of spiritual property in my perishing aunt. "The doctor tells me," my poor misguided relative went on, "that I am not so well to-day. He forbids me to see any strangers, and he orders me, if I read at all, only to read the lightest and most amusing books. Do nothing, Lady Verinder, to weary your head, or to quicken your pulse." Those were his last words, Drusilla, when he left me to-day. There was no help for it but to yield again, for the moment only, as before. Any open assertion of the infinitely superior importance of such a ministry as mine, compared with the ministry of the medical man, would only have provoked the doctor to practise on the human weakness of his patient, and to threaten to throw up the case. Happily there are more ways than one of sowing the good seed, and few persons are better versed in those ways than myself. "You might feel stronger, dear, in an hour or two," I said, "or you might wake to-morrow morning with a sense of something wanting, and even this unpretending volume might be able to supply it. You will let me leave the book, aunt? The doctor can hardly object to that." I slipped it under the sofa cushions, half in and half out, close by her handkerchief and her smelling bottle. Every time her hand searched for either of these, it would touch the book, and, sooner or later, who knows, the book might touch her. After making this arrangement, I thought it wise to withdraw. "Let me leave you to repose, dear aunt. I will call again to morrow." I looked accidentally towards the window as I said that. It was full of flowers in boxes and pots. Lady Verinder was extravagantly fond of these perishable treasures, and had a habit of rising every now and then, and going to look at them and smell them. A new idea flashed across my mind. "Oh, may I take a flower?" I said, and got to the window unsuspected in that way. Instead of taking away a flower, I added one, in the shape of another book from my bag, which I left to surprise my aunt among the geraniums and roses. The happy thought followed, why not do the same for her, poor dear, in every other room that she enters? I immediately said good bye, and crossing the hall, slipped into the library. Samuel, coming up, let me out, and supposing I had gone, went downstairs again. On the library table I noticed two of the amusing books which the infidel doctor had recommended. I instantly covered them from sight with two of my own precious publications. In the breakfast room I found my aunt's favourite canary singing in his cage. She was always in the habit of feeding the bird herself. Some groundsel was strewed on a table which stood immediately under the cage. I put a book among the groundsel. In the drawing room I found more cheering opportunities of emptying my bag. My aunt's favourite musical pieces were on the piano. I slipped in two more books among the music. I disposed of another in the back drawing room, under some unfinished embroidery which I knew to be of Lady Verinder's working. A third little room opened out of the back drawing room, from which it was shut off by curtains instead of a door. My aunt's plain, old-fashioned fan was on the chimney-piece. I opened my ninth book at a very special passage, and put the fan in as a marker, to keep the place. The question then came whether I should go higher still, and try the bedroom floor, at the risk, undoubtedly, of being insulted if the person with the cap ribbons happened to be in the upper regions of the house, and to find me put. But, oh, what of that? It is a poor Christian that is afraid of being insulted. I went upstairs prepared to bear anything. All was silent and solitary. It was the servants' tea time, I suppose. My aunt's room was in front. The miniature of my late dear uncle, Sir John, hung on the wall opposite the bed. It seemed to smile at me. It seemed to say, "Drusilla, deposit a book." There were tables on either side of my aunt's bed. She was a bad sleeper, and wanted, or thought she wanted, many things at night. I put a book near the matches on one side, and a book under the box of chocolate drops on the other. Whether she wanted a light, or whether she wanted a drop, there was a precious publication to meet her eye, or to meet her hand, and to say with silent eloquence, in either case, "Come, try me, try me." But one book was now left at the bottom of my bag, and but one apartment was still unexplored, the bathroom, which opened out of the bedroom. And I peeped in, and the holy inner voice that never deceives whispered to me, "You have met her, Drusilla, everywhere else. Meet her at the bath, and the work is done." I observed a dressing gown thrown across a chair. It had a pocket in it, and in that pocket I put my last book. Can words express my exquisite sense of duty done, when I had slipped out of the house, unsuspected by any of them, and when I found myself in the street with my empty bag under my arm? Oh, my worldly friends, pursuing the phantom, pleasure through the guilty mazes of dissipation, how easy it is to be happy, if you will only be good! When I folded up my things that night, when I reflected on the true riches which I had scattered with such a lavish hand from top to bottom of the house of my wealthy aunt, I declare I felt as free from all anxiety as if I had been a child again. I was so light-hearted that I sang a verse of the evening hymn. I was so light-hearted that I fell asleep before I could sing another. Quite like a child again, quite like a child again. So I passed that blissful night. On rising the next morning, how young I felt! I might add, how young I looked, if I were capable of dwelling on the corners of my own perishable body. But I am not capable, and I add nothing. Towards luncheon time, not for the sake of the creature comforts, but for the certainty of finding dear aunt, I put on my bonnet to go to Montagu Square. Just as I was ready, the maid at the lodgings in which I then lived looked in at the door and said, "Lady Verinder's servant to see Miss Cluck." I occupied the parlour floor at that period of my residence in London. The front parlour was my sitting room, very small, very low in the ceiling, very poorly furnished, but, oh, so neat! I looked into the passage to see which of Lady Verinder's servants had asked for me. It was the young footman, Samuel, a civil, fresh-coloured person, with a teachable look and a very obliging manner. I had always felt a spiritual interest in Samuel, and I wished to try him with a few serious words. On this occasion I invited him into my sitting room. He came in with a large parcel under his arm. When he put the parcel down it appeared to frighten him. "My lady's love, miss, and I was to say that you would find a letter inside." Having given that message, the fresh-coloured young footman surprised me by looking as if he would have liked to run away. I detained him to make a few kind inquiries. Could I see my aunt if I called in Montagu Square? No, she had gone out for a drive. Miss Rachel had gone with her, and Mr. Applewhite had taken a seat in the carriage too. Knowing how sadly dear Mr. Godfrey's charitable work was in arrear, I thought it odd that he should be going out driving like an idle man. I stopped Samuel at the door and made a few more kind inquiries. Miss Rachel was going to a ball that night, and Mr. Applewhite had arranged to come to coffee and go with her. There was a morning concert advertised for tomorrow, and Samuel was ordered to take places for a large party, including a place for Mr. Applewhite. "All the tickets may be gone, miss," said this innocent youth, "if I don't run and get them at once." He ran as he said the words, and I found myself alone again, with some anxious thoughts to occupy me. We had a special meeting of the Mothers' Small Clothes Conversion Society that night, summoned expressly with a view to obtaining Mr. Godfrey's advice and assistance. Instead of sustaining our sisterhood under an overwhelming flow of trousers which quite prostrated our little community, he had arranged to take coffee in Montagu Square and to go to a ball afterwards. The afternoon of the next day had been selected for the festival of the British Ladies' Servants' Sunday Sweethearts Supervision Society. Instead of being present, the life and soul of that struggling institution, he had engaged to make one of a party of worldlings at a morning concert. I asked myself what did it mean? Alas! It meant that our Christian hero was to reveal himself to me in a new character, and to become associated in my mind with one of the most awful backslidings of modern times. To return, however, to the history of the passing day. On finding myself alone in my room, I naturally turned my attention to the parcel which appeared to have so strangely intimidated the fresh-coloured young footman. Had my aunt sent me my promised legacy, and had it taken the form of cast-off clothes, or worn-out silver spoons, or unfashionable jewellery, or anything of that sort? Prepared to accept all and to resent nothing, I opened the parcel, and what met my view? The 12 precious publications which I had scattered through the house on the previous day, all returned to me by the doctor's orders. Well might the youthful Samuel shrink when he brought this parcel into my room, well might he run when he had performed his miserable errand. As to my aunt's letter, it simply amounted, poor soul, to this, that she dare not disobey her medical man. What was to be done now? With my training and my principles I never had a moment's doubt. Once self-supported by conscience, once embarked on a career of manifest usefulness, the true Christian never yields. Neither public nor private influences produce the slightest effect on us when we have once got our mission. Taxation may be the consequence of mission, riots may be the consequence of mission, wars may be the consequence of a mission. We go on with our work, irrespective of every human consideration which moves the world outside us. We are above reason, we are beyond ridicule. We see with nobody's eyes, we hear with nobody's ears, we feel with nobody's hearts but our own. Glorious, glorious privilege! And how is it earned? Ah, my friends, you may spare yourselves the useless inquiry. We are the only people who can earn it, for we are the only people who are always right. In the case of my misguided aunt, the form which pious perseverance was next to take revealed itself to me plainly enough. Preparation by clerical friends had failed, owing to Lady Verinder's own reluctance. Preparation by books had failed, owing to the doctor's infidel obstinacy. So be it. What was the next thing to try? The next thing to try was preparation by little notes. In other words, the books themselves having been sent back, select extracts from the books copied by different hands, and all addressed as letters to my aunt, were some to be sent by post, and some to be distributed about the house on the plan I had adopted the previous day. As letters they would excite no suspicion, as letters they would be opened and, once opened, might be read. Some of them I wrote myself. "Dear Aunt, may I ask your attention to a few lines," etc. "Dear Aunt, I was reading last night and I chanced on the following passage," etc. Other letters were written for me by my valued fellow workers, the sisterhood at the Mother Small Clothes. "Dear Madam, pardon the interest taken in you by a true so humble friend." "Dear Madam, may a serious person surprise you by saying a few cheering words?" Using these and other similar forms of courteous appeal, we introduced all my precious passages, under a form which not even the doctor's watchful materialism could suspect. Before the shades of evening had closed around us, I had a dozen awakening letters for my aunt, instead of a dozen awakening books. 6 I made immediate arrangements for sending through the post, and 6 I kept in my pocket for personal distribution in the house the next day. Soon after 2 o'clock I was again on the field of pious conflict, addressing more kind inquiries to Samuel at Lady Verinder's door. My aunt had had a bad night. She was again in the room in which I had witnessed her will, resting on the sofa, and trying to get a little sleep. I said I would wait in the library on the chance of seeing her. In the fervour of my zeal to distribute the letters, it never occurred to me to inquire about Rachel. The house was quiet, and it was past the hour at which the musical performance began. I took it for granted that she and her party of pleasure seekers, Mr. Godfrey, alas, included, were all at the concert, and eagerly devoted myself to my good work, while time and opportunity were still at my own disposal. My aunt's correspondence of the morning, including the 6 awakening letters which I had posted overnight, was lying unopened on the library table. She had evidently not felt herself equal to dealing with a large mass of letters, and she might be daunted by the number of them if she entered the library later in the day. I put one of my second set of the 6 letters on the chimney piece by itself, leaving it to attract her curiosity, by means of its solitary position apart from the rest. A second letter I put purposely on the floor in the breakfast room. The first servant who went in after me would conclude that my aunt had dropped it, and would be specially careful to restore it to her. The field thus sown on the basement story, I ran lightly upstairs to scatter my mercies next over the drawing room floor. Just as I entered the front room, I heard a double knock at the street door, a soft, fluttering, considerate little knock. Before I could think of slipping back to the library, in which I was supposed to be waiting, the active young footman was in the hall, answering the door. It mattered little, as I thought. In my aunt's state of health, visitors in general were not admitted. To my horror and amazement, the performer of the soft little knock proved to be an exception to general rules. Samuel's voice below me, after apparently asking some questions which I did not hear, said unmistakably, "Upstairs, if you please, sir." The next moment I heard footsteps, a man's footsteps, approaching the drawing room floor. Who could this favoured male visitor possibly be? Almost as soon as I asked myself the question, the answer occurred to me. Who could it be but the doctor? In the case of any other visitor, I should have allowed myself to be discovered in the drawing room. There would have been nothing out of the common in my having got tired of the library and having gone upstairs for a change. But my own self-respect stood in the way of my meeting the person who had insulted me by sending me back my books. I slipped into the little third room which I have mentioned as communicating with the back drawing room, and dropped the curtains which closed the open doorway. If I only waited there for a minute or two, the usual result in such cases would take place, that is to say, the doctor would be conducted to his patient's room. I waited a minute or two, and more than a minute or two. I heard the visitor walking restlessly backwards and forwards. I also heard him talking to himself. I even thought I recognized the voice. Had I made a mistake? Was it not the doctor, but somebody else? Mr. Bruff, for instance? No, an unerring instinct told me it was not Mr. Bruff. Whoever he was still talking to himself. I parted the heavy curtains the least little morsel in the world, and listened. The words I heard were, "I'll do it today," and the voice that spoke them was Mr. Godfrey Ablewhite's. End of part 27. The Moonstone, part 28. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. Read by Christine. The Discovery of the Truth. First Narrative. Chapter 5. My hand dropped from the curtain. But don't suppose, oh, don't suppose, that the dreadful embarrassment of my situation was the uppermost idea in my mind. So fervent still was the sisterly interest I felt in Mr. Godfrey, that I never stopped to ask myself why he was not at the concert. No, I thought only of the words, the startling words, which had just fallen from his lips. He would do it today. He had said in a tone of terrible resolution he would do it today. What, oh, what would he do? Something even more deplorably unworthy of him than what he had done already? Would he apostatize from the faith? Would he abandon us at the Mother's small closes? Had we seen the last of his angry smile in the committee's room? Had we heard the last of his unrivalled eloquence at Exeter Hall? I was so wrought up by the bare idea of such awful eventualities as these in connection with such a man, that I believe I should have rushed from my place of concealment and implored him in the name of all the ladies' committees in London to explain himself, when I suddenly heard another voice in the room. It penetrated through the curtains, it was loud, it was bold, it was wanting in every female charm, the voice of Rachel Verinder. "Why have you come up here, Godfrey?" she asked. "Why didn't you go into the library?" He laughed softly and answered, "Miss Clark is in the library." "Clark in the library!" She instantly seated herself on the ottoman in the back drawing room. "You are quite right, Godfrey. We had much better stop here." I had been in a burning fever a moment since, and in some doubt what to do next. I became extremely cold now, and felt no doubt whatever. To show myself, after what I had heard, was impossible. To retreat, except into the fireplace, was equally out of the question. A martyrdom was before me. In justice to myself, I noiselessly arranged the curtains so that I could both see and hear, and then I met my martyrdom with the spirit of a primitive Christian. "Don't sit on the ottoman," the young lady proceeded. "Bring a chair, Godfrey. I like people to be opposite to me when I talk to them." He took the nearest seat. It was a low chair. He was very tall, and many sizes too large for it. I never saw his legs to such disadvantage before. "Well," she went on, "what did you say to them?" "Just what you said, dear angel, to me." "That mamma was not at all well today, and that I didn't quite like leaving her to go to the concert." "Those were the words. They were grieved to lose you at the concert, but they quite understood. All sent their love, and all expressed a cheering belief that Lady Verinder's indisposition would soon pass away." You don't think it serious, do you, Godfrey?" "Far from it. In a few days I feel quite sure all will be well again." "I think so too. I was a little frightened at first, but I think so too. It was very kind to go and make my excuses for me to people who are almost strangers to you. But why not have gone with them to the concert? It seems very hard that you should miss the music too." "Don't say that, Rachel. If you only knew how much happier I am here with you." He clasped his hands and looked at her. In the position which he occupied when he did that he turned my way. Can words describe how I sickened when I noticed exactly the same pathetic expression on his face which had charmed me when he was pleading for destitute millions of his fellow creatures on the platform at Exeter Hall? "It's hard to get over one's bad habits, Godfrey. But do try to get over the habit of paying compliments. Do, to please me." "I never paid you a compliment, Rachel, in my life. Successful love may sometimes use the language of flattery, I admit. But hopeless love, dearest, always speaks the truth." He drew his chair close and took her hand when he said "hopeless love." There was a momentary silence. He who thrilled everybody had doubtless thrilled her. I thought I now understood the words which had dropped from him when he was alone in the drawing room. "I'll do it today." Alas! the most rigid propriety could hardly have failed to discover that he was doing it now. "Have you forgotten what we agreed on, Godfrey, when you spoke to me in the country? We agreed that we were to be cousins and nothing more." "I break the arrangement, Rachel, every time I see you." "Then don't see me." "Quite useless. I break the arrangement every time I think of you. Oh, Rachel, how kindly you told me, only the other day, that my place in your estimation was a higher place than it had ever been yet. Am I mad to build the hopes I do on those dear words? Am I mad to dream of some future day when your heart may soften to me? Don't tell me so if I am. Leave me my delusion, dearest. I must have that to cherish and to comfort me, if I have nothing else." His voice trembled, and he put his white handkerchief to his eyes. Exeter Hall again. Nothing wanting to complete the parallel but the audience, the cheers, and the glass of water. Even her obdurate nature was touched. I saw her lean a little nearer to him. I heard a new tone of interest in her next words. "Are you really sure, Godfrey, that you are so fond of me as that?" "Sure. You know what I was, Rachel. Let me tell you what I am. I have lost every interest in life but my interest in you. A transformation has come over me which I can't account for myself. Would you believe it? My charitable business is an unendurable nuisance to me. And when I saw a ladies' committee now, I wished myself at the uttermost ends of the earth. If the annals of apostasy offer anything comparable to such a declaration as that, I can only say that the case in point is not producible from the stores of my reading. I thought of the mother's small clothes. I thought of the Sunday sweetheart supervision. I thought of the other societies, too numerous to mention, all built up on this man as on a tower of strength. I thought of the struggling female boards, who, so to speak, draw the breath of their business life through the nostrils of Mr. Godfrey, of that same Mr. Godfrey, who had just reviled our good work as a nuisance, and just declared that he wished he was at the uttermost ends of the earth when he found himself in our company. My young female friends will feel encouraged to persevere when I mention that it tried even my discipline before I could devour my own righteous indignation in silence. At the same time it's only justice to myself to add that I didn't lose a syllable of the conversation. Rachel was the next to speak. "You have made your confession," she said. "I wonder whether it would cure you of your unhappy attachment to me if I made mine." He started. I confess I started too. He thought, and I thought, that she was about to divulge the mystery of the Moonstone. "Would you think to look at me," she went on, "that I am the wretchedest girl living? It's true, Godfrey. What greater wretchedness can there be than to live degraded in your own estimation? That is my life now." My dear Rachel, it's impossible you can have any reason to speak of yourself in that way." "How do you know I have no reason?" "Can you ask me the question? I know it, because I know you. Your silence, dearest, has never lowered you in the estimation of your true friends. The disappearance of your precious birthday gift may seem strange. Your unexplained connection with that even may seem stranger still." "Are you speaking of the Moonstone, Godfrey?" "I certainly thought that you referred—" "I referred to nothing of the sort. I can hear of the loss of the Moonstone, let who will speak of it, without feeling degraded in my own estimation. If the story of a diamond ever comes to light, it will be known that I accepted a dreadful responsibility. It will be known that I involved myself in the keeping of a miserable secret, but it will be as clear as the sun at noonday that I did nothing mean. You have misunderstood me, Godfrey. It's my fault for not speaking more plainly. Cost me what it may, I will be plainer now. Suppose you were not in love with me. Suppose you were in love with some other woman." "Yes." "Suppose you discovered that woman to be utterly unworthy of you. Suppose you were quite convinced that it was a disgrace to you to waste another thought of her. Suppose the bare idea of ever marrying such a person made your face burn only with thinking of it." "Yes." "And suppose, in spite of all that, you couldn't tear her from your heart. Suppose the feeling she had roused in you, in the time when you believed in her, was not a feeling to be hidden. Suppose the love this wretch had inspired in you. Oh, how can I find words to say it in? How can I make a man understand that a feeling which horrifies me at myself can be a feeling that fascinates me at the same time? It's the breath of my life, Godfrey, and it's the poison that kills me, both in one. Go away. I must be out of my mind to talk as I am talking now. No, you mustn't leave me. You mustn't carry away a wrong impression. I must say what is to be said in my own defense. Mind this, he doesn't know, he never will know what I have told you. I will never see him. I don't care what happens. I will never, never, never see him again. Don't ask me his name. Don't ask me any more. Let's change the subject. Are you doctor enough, Godfrey, to tell me why I feel as if I was stifling for want of breath? Is there a form of hysterics that bursts into words instead of tears? I dare say. What does it matter? You will get over any trouble I have caused you easily enough now. I have dropped to my right place in your estimation, haven't I? Don't notice me. Don't pity me. For God's sake, go away." She turned round on the sudden and beat her hands wildly on the back of the ottoman. Her head dropped on the cushions, and she burst out crying. Before I had time to feel shocked at this, I was horror-struck by an entirely unexpected proceeding on the part of Mr. Godfrey. Will it be credited that he fell on his knees at her feet? On both knees, I solemnly declare. May modesty mention that he put his arms round her next? And may reluctant admiration acknowledge that he electrified her with 2 words, "Noble creature"? No more than that, but he did it with one of the bursts which have made his fame as a public speaker. She sat, either quite thunderstruck or quite fascinated, I don't know which, without even making an effort to put his arms back where his arms ought to have been. As for me, my sense of propriety was completely bewildered. I was so painfully uncertain whether it was my first duty to close my eyes or to stop my ears, that I did neither. I attribute my being still able to hold the curtain in the right position for looking and listening entirely to suppressed hysterics. In suppressed hysterics it is admitted, even by the doctors, that one must hold something. "Yes," he said, with all the fascination of his evangelical voice and manner, "you are a noble creature. A woman who can speak the truth for the truth's own sake, a woman who will sacrifice her pride rather than sacrifice an honest man who loves her, is the most priceless of all treasures. When such a woman marries, if her husband only wins her esteem and regard, he wins enough to ennoble his whole life. You have spoken, dearest, of your place in my estimation. Judge what that place is, when I implore you on my knees to let the cure of your poor wounded heart be my care. Rachel, will you honor me, will you bless me by being my wife?" By this time I should certainly have decided on stopping my ears, if Rachel had not encouraged me to keep them open by answering him in the first sensible words I had ever heard fall from her lips. "Godfrey," she said, "you must be mad." "I never spoke more reasonably, dearest, in your interests as well as in mine. Look for a moment to the future. Is your happiness to be sacrificed to a man who has never known how you feel towards him, and whom you are resolved never to see again? Is it not your duty to yourself to forget this ill-fated attachment? And is forgetfulness to be found in the life you are leading now? You have tried that life, and you are wearying of it already. Surround yourself with nobler interests than the wretched interests of the world, a heart that loves and honors you, a home whose peaceful claims and happy duties win gently on you, day by day. Try the consolation, Rachel, which is to be found there. I don't ask you for your love. I will be content with your affection and regard. Let the rest be left, confidently left, to your husband's devotion, and to time that heals even wounds as deep as yours." She began to yield already. Oh, what a bringing up she must have had! Oh, how differently I should have acted in her place! "Don't tempt me, Godfrey," she said. "I am wretched enough and reckless enough as it is. Don't tempt me to be more wretched and more reckless still." "One question, Rachel. Have you any personal objection to me?" "I always liked you. After what you have just said to me, I should be insensible indeed if I didn't respect and admire you as well." "Do you know many wives, my dear Rachel, who respect and admire their husbands? And yet they and their husbands get on very well. How many brides go to the altar with hearts that would bear inspection by the man who takes them there? And yet it doesn't end unhappily. Somehow or other the nuptial establishment jogs on. The truth is that women try marriage as a refuge, far more numerously than they are willing to admit, and, what is more, they find that marriage has justified their confidence in it. Look at your own case once again. At your age, and with your attractions, is it possible for you to sentence yourself to a single life? Trust my knowledge of the world, nothing is less possible. It's merely a question of time. You may marry some other man some years hence, or you may marry the man, dearest, who is now at your feet, and who prizes your respect and admiration above the love of any other woman on the face of the earth." "Gently, Godfrey. You are putting something into my head which I never thought of before. You are tempting me with a new prospect when all my other prospects are closed before me. I tell you again, I am miserable enough and desperate enough, if you say another word, to marry you on your own terms. Take the warning and go. I won't even rise from my knees till you have said yes." "If I say yes you will repent, and I shall repent when it is too late." "We shall both bless the day, darling, when I pressed and when you yield." "Do you feel as confidently as you speak?" "You shall judge for yourself. I speak from what I have seen in my own family. Tell me what you think of our household at Frysingthall. Do my father and mother live unhappily together?" "Far from it, so far as I can see." "When my mother was a girl, Rachel, it is no secret in the family, she had loved as you love. She had given her heart to a man who was unworthy of her. She married my father, respecting him, admiring him, but nothing more. Your own eyes have seen the result. Is there no encouragement in it for you and for me?" Note. See Betteridge's narrative, chapter 8. End of the note. "You won't hurry me, Godfrey?" "My time shall be yours." "You won't ask me for more than I can give?" "My angel, I only ask you to give me yourself." "Take me." In those two words she accepted him. He had another burst, a burst of unholy rapture this time. He drew her nearer and nearer to him till her face touched his, and then, no, I really cannot prevail upon myself to carry this shocking disclosure any farther. Let me only say that I tried to close my eyes before it happened, and that I was just one moment too late. I had calculated, you see, on her resisting. She submitted. To every right-feeling person of my own sex, volumes could say no more. Even my innocence in such matters began to see its way to the end of the interview now. They understood each other so thoroughly by this time that I fully expected to see them walk off together, arm in arm, to be married. There appeared, however, judging by Mr. Godfrey's next words, to be one more trifling formality, which it was necessary to observe. He seated himself, unforbidden this time, on the ottoman by her side. "Shall I speak to your dear mother?" he asked, "or will you?" She declined both alternatives. "Let my mother hear nothing from either of us until she is better. I wish it to be kept a secret for the present, Godfrey. Go now, and come back this evening. We have been here alone together quite long enough." She rose, and in rising, looked for the first time towards the little room in which my martyrdom was going on. "Who has drawn those curtains?" she exclaimed. "The room is close enough as it is, without keeping the air out of it in that way." She advanced to the curtains. At the moment when she laid her hand on them, at the moment when the discovery of me appeared to be quite inevitable, the voice of the fresh-colored young footman on the stairs suddenly suspended any further proceedings on her side or on mine. It was unmistakably the voice of man in great alarm. "Miss Rachel!" he called out. "Where are you, Miss Rachel?" She sprang back from the curtains and ran to the door. The footman came just inside the room. His ruddy color was all gone. He said, "Please to come downstairs, miss. My lady has fainted, and we can't bring her to again." In a moment more I was alone, and free to go downstairs in my turn, quite unobserved. Mr. Godfrey passed me in the hall, hurrying out to fetch the doctor. "Go in and help them," he said, pointing to the room. I found Rachel on her knees by the sofa, with her mother's head on her bosom. One look at my aunt's face, knowing what I knew, was enough to warn me of the dreadful truth. I kept my thoughts to myself till the doctor came in. It was not long before he arrived. He began by sending Rachel out of the room, and then he told the rest of us that Lady Verinder was no more. Serious persons, in search of proofs of hardened scepticism, may be interested in hearing that he showed no signs of remorse when he looked at me. At a later hour I peeped into the breakfast room and the library. My aunt had died without opening one of the letters which I had addressed to her. I was so shocked at this that it never occurred to me until some days afterwards that she had also died without giving me my little legacy. End of Part 28.